knew exactly how many rounds of 9mm ammunition I had in my locker. 450. I knew exactly how many liters of water were stored in the jerry cans behind the server racks on the 43rd floor. 200. And I knew exactly what time the sun hit the east face of the spire on a Tuesday in October. 7:42 a.m. People called it obsession. The junior VPs on the 80th floor called it paranoia. I heard the jokes. I saw the memes they circulated on the company's Slack channel. Pictures of me with a tinfoil hat, captioned, "Doomsday Vance is at it again." They laughed when I petitioned for upgraded biofilters in the HVAC system. They laughed when I spent my Christmas bonus on MREs instead of a trip to Cabo. They laughed right up until the moment the screaming started. My name is Elias Vance. I am the chief engineer for the Ethelgard Spire, the tallest, smartest, and most secure building in the city. And this is how the world ended. It started at 8:15 a.m. I was in the sub-basement, 3 levels below the parking garage, staring at the pressure gauges for the main boiler. The air down here always smelled of ozone and hot copper, a smell I preferred to the expensive perfume and fake smiles in the lobby. It was my domain. The guts of the beast. While the executives upstairs in their Italian suits worried about stock prices and quarterly projections, I worried about the tensile strength of the hydraulic lines and the integrity of the backup generators. I was the one who kept their lights on and their air breathable, even if they looked at me like I was part of the plumbing. I was running a diagnostic on the fire suppression system when my radio crackled. It was Miller, the head of lobby security. A good guy, Miller. Former beat cop, thick around the middle now, with a laugh that shook his whole body. He was one of the few people in the building who didn't treat me like a conspiracy theorist. "Elias, you copy?" "I'm here, Miller. What's broken now?" I wiped grease from my hands with a rag, not looking away from the gauges. "If it's the executive elevator again, tell them to stop holding the door open for their coffee runs." "Nothing's broken." Miller's voice sounded tight, strained. The jovial tone was gone, replaced by a tremor I hadn't heard before. "But we've got a situation at the main desk. Courier just dropped, like a sack of bricks. He's convulsing." I sighed, tapping the glass of the pressure gauge. "Call 911, Miller. I'm an engineer, not a medic. You know the protocol for a medical emergency." "I did," Miller said, and the speed of his speech was picking up, bordering on frantic. "Lines are busy, all of them. I got a busy signal on 911, Elias." "Who gets a busy signal on 911? And the guy is bleeding. It's not red." That stopped me. My hand froze on the valve wheel. The hum of the boiler room seemed to drop away, leaving only the tinny voice coming from the radio on my belt. "What do you mean it's not red?" "It's black, Elias. It looks like oil. It's coming out of his eyes. It's weeping out of his nose. He's shaking so hard I can hear his bones popping." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a primal electric jolt that I hadn't felt since my tour in Fallujah. It was that lizard brain instinct, the one that screams predator before you even see the teeth. I didn't hesitate. I didn't question it. I grabbed my go bag from the cage. It was a heavy, nondescript canvas duffel that sat next to my toolbox. To anyone else, it looked like just another piece of maintenance equipment. Inside, it held a Glock 19, 3 spare magazines loaded with hollow points, a first aid trauma kit, a crowbar, and 3 days of high-calorie rations. "Lock the front doors, Miller," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of a man giving an order, not a suggestion. "What? I can't do that. It's rush hour. The morning rush is—" "Lock the damn doors, Miller. Keep everyone inside the lobby. Keep everyone away from that courier. Do not let anyone touch him. I'm coming up." I didn't wait for an answer. I sprinted toward the service elevator, the heavy bag slamming against my hip with every stride. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was cold, calculating. Black blood, hemorrhage, seizures. busy emergency lines. This wasn't a heart attack. This wasn't a stroke. This was the scenario I had written about in my risk assessment memo 3 years ago. The memo Sarah from marketing had used as a coaster during the Christmas party. As the elevator doors slid shut, I checked my watch. 8:18 a.m. By 8:30, the world as we knew it would be gone. The service elevator hummed as it ascended, bypassing the parking levels and the retail mezzanine. I used the time to unzip the bag, just enough to slide my hand in and grip the cold rubber handle of the crowbar. I didn't pull the gun yet. You don't pull a gun in a corporate lobby unless you're ready to use it. And I wasn't ready to start a panic. Not yet. I needed to see it. I needed to confirm the variables. The elevator opened onto the ground floor, tucked away behind a marble pillar near the restrooms. The sound hit me first. Usually, the Spire's lobby was a cathedral of hushed whispers, clicking heels, and the soft chime of elevator arrivals. It was designed to project power and serenity. Now, it sounded like a kennel. There was a low, collective murmur of confusion, punctuated by sharp, high-pitched gasps and the frantic chatter of people asking questions nobody could answer. I stepped out, keeping the bag slung tight against my back. The air tasted different here. Downstairs it was ozone. Here it was fear, sweat, expensive cologne, and something metallic like a handful of pennies clenched in a fist. A crowd had gathered near the revolving doors, a circle of expensive suits, curious onlookers holding up their phones, recording. That was the first mistake. They treated it like a spectacle. They were filming it for their Instagram stories, framing the tragedy for likes. They didn't understand that they were standing in the kill zone. I pushed through the crowd, using my shoulder to shove a junior analyst aside. Move. Back up. Give him air. Hey, watch it, Vance, someone sneered. Going to fix the plumbing? I ignored him. I broke through the inner circle and saw Miller kneeling beside the courier. The courier was young, maybe 22, wearing a generic delivery uniform with a logo I didn't recognize. He was thrashing on the polished terrazzo floor, his heels drumming a staccato rhythm against the stone. Miller was trying to hold his shoulders down, but the kid was strong, unnaturally strong. His muscles were corded tight, tendons standing out like steel cables in his neck. Miller looked up at me, his face pale and shining with sweat. He's burning up, Elias. I can feel the heat through his jacket. It's like touching a stove. I looked at the kid's face. Miller was right. Thick, viscous black fluid was weeping from the kid's tear ducts, tracking down his cheeks like war paint. It pooled in the hollows of his eyes, obscuring the whites. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his jaw locked wide, his teeth grinding together so hard I could hear the enamel snapping. It sounded like someone crushing dry cereal. "Get off him," I said, reaching into my bag, my hand wrapping fully around the crowbar now. "Miller, get away from his mouth. He's sick, Elias. We need to help him. We can't just—" "He's not sick, Miller. Look at his veins." I pointed with my free hand. The skin around the courier's neck was translucent, pale as parchment, and beneath it, the veins were turning black. Not blue, not purple, black. And they were moving. It looked like ink was being pumped through his system under high pressure, spiderwebbing up his jawline, spreading across his forehead. This was rapid necrosis or some kind of accelerated viral replication. Whatever it was rewriting his biology in real time. The courier's back arched, his spine bending at a sickening angle that should have snapped his vertebrae. A sound tore out of his throat. Not a scream, but a wet, rattling hiss. Like air escaping a punctured lung. K-k-k-k-back. Then he snapped. The movement was too fast. It defied physics. 1 second, the kid was on his back, pinned by gravity and Miller's weight. The next, he had launched himself upward, torquing his body with impossible leverage. His head whipped forward, and his teeth broken, jagged, stained with that black bile clamped onto Miller's forearm. Miller screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound that shattered the atmosphere of the lobby. It cut through the murmurs, through the phone recordings, through the denial. Blood sprayed across the white marble, bright arterial red mixing with the courier's black sludge. "Get off him!" I roared. I swung the bag, hitting the courier in the ribs. It felt like hitting a bag of wet cement. There was no give. The courier didn't even flinch. He didn't register the impact. He ripped his head back, tearing a chunk of flesh from Miller's arm with the savage efficiency of a wild animal. Panic detonated. The crowd of onlookers exploded backward. People were screaming, tripping over each other, dropping their phones to scramble away on hands and knees. The veneer of civilization evaporated in a single second. The suits, the ties, the briefcases. None of it mattered. They were just meat now. The courier, the thing, scrambled to its feet. It didn't stand like a human. It was crouched, feral, its limbs twitching with mechanical spasms. It swallowed the meat it had torn from Miller, a convulsing gulp that was audible over the screaming. Then it turned its head. Its eyes were gone, just pools of milky white sclera surrounded by black hemorrhage. No iris, no pupil, just a void. It looked at me. It didn't know me, didn't recognize the threat. It just saw movement. Then it looked at the woman in the gray suit standing frozen 5 feet away. Sarah, the VP of marketing, the woman who had rolled her eyes at me during the safety briefing last month. She was paralyzed, clutching her latte like a talisman, her mouth open in silent shock. She was the closest prey. The thing lunged. I didn't think. I reacted. The training took over. Not the engineering training, but the preparation. The endless drills I had run in my head. Threat, target, neutralize. I stepped forward, swinging the heavy canvas bag with everything I had. I put my hips into it, treating the bag like a wrecking ball. The brass zipper caught the infected in the temple, knocking it off course mid-air. It crashed into the reception desk, shattering the glass partition with a deafening crash. Shards of safety glass rained down like diamonds. "Run!" I screamed at Sarah, grabbing her by the shoulder of her expensive blazer and shaking her. "Get to the elevators." She blinked, snapping out of her trance, looking from me to the creature struggling to rise from the broken glass. "What? What is that?" "Go." I shoved her toward the elevator bank hard enough that she stumbled. I grabbed Miller by his good arm. He was in shock, staring at the ruin of his forearm, where the ulna was visible white bone amidst the red ruin. He was swaying, his eyes rolling back, upstairs. Now. I hauled him up. He was heavy, dead weight. "My gun," Miller stammered, his hand pawing feebly at his duty belt. "Elias, my gun." "Forget the gun, Miller. You can't shoot it if you can't stand." "Move." We scrambled toward the elevators. The lobby was pure chaos now. People were clawing at the revolving doors, creating a crush of bodies against the glass. The sensors had jammed from the press of humanity. Outside, on the street, I saw a taxi swerve and plow into a city bus. Metal screeched, glass shattered. A woman was running down the sidewalk, tackled by 3 people who moved with that same jerky, violent speed. They tore at her clothes, at her skin. It wasn't just here. It was everywhere. The courier wasn't patient zero. He was just the first one inside the wire. I slammed my key card against the reader for the express elevator. The light blinked green. Thank God the system was still online. The doors slid open. I shoved Sarah and Miller inside. "Hold the door!" someone screamed from the lobby. A man in a blue suit was sprinting toward us, his face a mask of terror. Behind him, the courier had recovered. It vaulted over the reception desk, clearing it with a leap that no human should be capable of. It landed on the man's back, driving him to the floor. I hit the close door button. "No!" Sarah screamed, reaching for the sensor. "We have to help him." I slapped her hand away. He's dead. Look, the courier was tearing at the man's neck. Blood fountained up, splashing against the polished brass of the elevator doors, and he wasn't alone. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Clara who always brought me donuts on Fridays, was standing up from behind the desk. A jagged piece of glass was embedded in her neck, severing the jugular, but she didn't seem to care. She wasn't holding the wound. She was smiling, but her smile was too wide. Her lips split at the corners, and her teeth were black with fluid. Her eyes were white. She let out a shriek that vibrated in my teeth, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She started running toward the elevator. The doors sealed with a soft, final ding. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The chaotic roar of the lobby was cut off instantly, replaced by the smooth hum of the lift rising and the piped-in elevator music, some light jazz that felt obscenely normal. Miller slid down the wall of the elevator car, leaving a broad smear of bright red blood on the brushed steel. He was gasping for air, clutching his arm. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, pressing herself into the corner of the elevator car as far away from Miller as she could get. Her impeccable suit was splattered with blood. Miller's blood. Maybe the courier's. "Elias, what the hell was that?" I didn't answer her yet. I dropped my bag and unzipped it fully. The sound of the zipper was loud in the small space. I pulled out the trauma kit, a serious one, not the little plastic box on the wall. I pulled out a cat tourniquet. Then I pulled out the Glock. Sarah's eyes went wide, fixing on the weapon. You have a gun? You brought a gun into the building? You're insane. I'm calling HR. I'm calling the police." I ignored her threats. They belonged to a world that had ceased to exist 3 minutes ago. I racked the slide on the Glock, checking the chamber. Brass. Good. I set it on the floor within easy reach and knelt beside Miller. "Give me your arm," I said. "It burns." Miller gasped, sweat beading on his forehead and rolling into his eyes. "Elias, it feels like fire, like someone poured acid in my veins." I looked at the wound. It was a nightmare. The bite was deep, ragged, tearing through muscle and grazing the bone. But the trauma wasn't what scared me. It was the infection. The veins around the bite were already turning that distinct spiderweb black. They were tracking up his wrist toward his elbow, moving visibly as I watched. It was fast, terrifyingly fast. It had been less than 2 minutes since the bite. I wrapped the tourniquet high on his arm, almost at the armpit. "This is going to hurt, Miller. I need to cut off the flow." I twisted the windlass. Miller cried out, his back arching off the floor, but I kept twisting until the bleeding stopped and the strap bit deep into his bicep. I locked it in place. I looked up at Miller's face. His pupils were dilating. Contracting, dilating. His breathing was hitching, catching in his throat. He was fighting it, but he was losing. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Check his pockets, get his radio, get his key card." "I'm not touching him," she shrieked. "He's infected. You saw what that thing did." I stood up, grabbing the gun and leveling a look at her that silenced her panic. "Do it. We need his clearance. My card only gets us to maintenance. His gets us everywhere." She trembled, tears spilling over her lashes, but she moved. She reached into Miller's pocket with 2 fingers, pulling out the master keycard and his radio. She dropped them on the floor and scrambled back. "Listen to me," I said, looking at both of them. "We are going to the 40th floor. Mechanical. I have supplies there. We are going to lock the door, and we are going to wait." "Wait for what?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch again. "The police? The army? We need to go to the roof. We need a helicopter." I looked at the floor indicator. 20, 21, 22. We were rising fast. "No," I said. "We aren't waiting for help, Sarah." "Did you see the street?" Did you see the taxi? The police aren't coming. The army isn't coming. Not in time. Then what are we doing? She sobbed. I looked at the black veins creeping past the tourniquet on Miller's arm. It wasn't stopping. The infection was already in his system before I applied the pressure. The math was bad. The math was cruel. We're waiting to see if we're the only ones left, I said. The elevator slowed. Ding. Floor 40. The doors opened onto the mechanical level. It was dark, lit only by the blinking LEDs of server banks and the hum of the HVAC turbines. It was loud, industrial, and smelled of oil. It was safe. For now. I grabbed the bag. I grabbed Miller under his good arm and hauled him up. Move, Miller, 1 foot in front of the other. We stumbled out into the corridor. I hit the button on the wall to lock the elevator out, preventing it from being called from this floor again. I turned to face the darkness of the spire's heart. I raised the weapon, sweeping the shadows. Welcome to the apocalypse, I muttered, more to myself than to them. I hope you packed a bag. Miller groaned, his legs buckling. I caught him, but I saw his eyes roll back again. The whites were starting to cloud over. A single tear of black fluid leaked from the corner of his eye. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at Miller, realizing what I already knew. He's turning, she whispered. I know, I said, tightening my grip on the Glock. Get inside. Lock the door. The screaming from the floors below began to filter up through the ventilation shafts, a chorus of terror rising through the building's steel throat. The prep didn't save the world, it didn't save the courier, and it probably wouldn't save Miller. But as I shoved the heavy steel door of the control room shut and threw the deadbolt, I knew one thing. It had bought me a chance, and on day one, a chance was the only thing worth having. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, industrial thud that vibrated through the steel door and into my palms. It was the sound of a prison cell closing. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was locking the danger out or locking myself in with it. The mechanical room on the 40th floor was a cavern of noise and shadow. The massive HVAC turbines that cycled air through the spire's 90 stories roared like trapped jet engines, a constant, deafening drone that vibrated in your teeth. Red emergency LEDs pulsed in the darkness, casting long, rhythmic shadows that stretched and contracted like breathing lungs. It smelled of ozone, high-grade machine lubricant, and the stale, recycled air of a building that had just sealed its own throat. I turned away from the door, my grip on the Glock sweating against the polymer frame. Sarah was backed into the corner, pressed against a rack of backup servers, her eyes wide and wet, fixed on the man writhing on the floor. Miller wasn't Miller anymore. He was unraveling. The tourniquet I'd cranked onto his arm was buried deep in his flesh, the nylon strap straining against the swelling muscle. But it hadn't mattered. The black veins had bypassed the constriction, branching out across his chest and neck like a subterranean root system seeking water. They pulsed with a wet, erratic rhythm, independent of his heart rate. Elias, Miller wheezed. The sound was wet, bubbling up through a throat that was rapidly filling with fluid. He tried to push himself up, but his left arm, the good one, slipped in his own blood. It's dark. Why is it so dark? I knelt 5 feet away from him, keeping the weapon trained on his chest. It's the infection, Miller. It's attacking the optic nerve. You're hemorrhaging behind the eyes. I can't see you, he gasped. He turned his head toward the sound of my voice. The milky film I'd seen on the courier was claiming him now, a cataract growing in real time, swallowing the iris, swallowing the pupil, turning his eyes into blind white marbles floating in pools of black oil. Sarah, I said, not looking at her. Get behind the server rack. Cover your ears. Don't, she sobbed, her voice small and broken over the roar of the turbines. Elias, please. He's still talking. He's still him. He's not him, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the pity that would get us killed. Listen to his breathing, Sarah. Listen to the fluid. He's drowning in his own blood. The virus is rewriting his physiology to turn him into a delivery system. If I don't do this, he stands up in 2 minutes and tears your throat out. That is the math. There is no other variable. Miller's body seized, his back arched off the grate floor, his spine bending with that same sickening, unnatural flexibility I'd seen in the lobby. His jaw, unhinged, stretching wide, and a sound tore out of him that had no place in a human throat, a high, chaotic shriek of pure adrenal rage. Black bile erupted from his mouth, splattering the toes of my boots. "Do it!" I screamed at myself internally. Hesitation is death. I stepped forward. Miller, the thing that had been Miller, scrambled toward the sound of my boot on the metal grate. He moved like a spider, limbs flailing but finding purchase with terrifying strength. He wasn't blind anymore. He was hunting by sound, by scent, by the heat radiating off my body. I didn't shoot. A gunshot in a room full of pressurized hydraulics and high-voltage servers was a risk I couldn't take, and the noise would ring the dinner bell for every infected thing in the stairwell. I holstered the Glock and swung the heavy canvas bag off my shoulder in one fluid motion. I gripped the crowbar I'd staged earlier. Cold steel, heavy, reliable. Miller lunged. He didn't stand up. He launched himself from a 4-point crouch, teeth snapping at my knees. I sidestepped, the adrenaline flooding my system, making time feel like thick syrup. I saw the black veins pulsing in his neck. I saw the mindless hunger in his white eyes. I swung the crowbar. The impact was wet and heavy. The hooked end caught him behind the ear, driving his skull into the steel grating with a sickening crunch. He went down, limbs thrashing, hands clawing at the metal floor, trying to find traction to rise again. He didn't stop. He pushed himself up. Half his skull caved in, his brain trauma seemingly irrelevant to the infection driving his motor functions. "Stay down," I grunted, bringing the bar down again and again. I didn't stop until the thrashing ceased. I didn't stop until the only sound in the room was the roar of the turbines and my own ragged breathing. I stood over the ruin of what used to be a good man, a man who had shown me pictures of his grandkids, a man who had laughed at my prep but unlocked the door for me anyway. I wiped the crowbar on his uniform pants, leaving a streak of black sludge on the dark fabric. "The math," I whispered, the mantra tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just the math." I turned to Sarah. She had slid down to the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking so violently her teeth were chattering. "Get up," I said. It came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't afford to be gentle. Gentle got you killed. Gentle got you turned. "Sarah, get up. We aren't safe here." She looked up at me. Her face was a mask of horror, mascara streaking down her cheeks, mixing with the blood spray she'd picked up in the lobby. "You killed him. You beat him to death." "I saved us," I corrected, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. "And now I need you to be useful. Can you do that? Can you be useful? Or are you going to be dead weight?" She stared at me, her chest heaving. I saw the spark of anger in her eyes. Good. Anger was fuel. Fear was just an anchor. I'm useful," she stammered. "Good. Watch the door. If the handle moves, if you hear anything scratching on the other side, you scream. Do you understand?" She nodded, backing away from Miller's body, her eyes fixed on the heavy steel door. I moved to the workstation at the far end of the room. This was the building management system, the BMS, the brain of the spire. I had 3 monitors here, usually displaying mundane data like water pressure and airflow. Now, they were my window into hell. I tapped the keyboard, waking the system. My credentials were still logged in. I pulled up the CCTV grid. "Oh God," I breathed. The lobby feed was a slaughterhouse. The floor, usually pristine white marble, was slick with red and black. Bodies lay in heaps near the revolving doors, people who had been crushed in the panic or dragged down by the pack. But the dead weren't staying dead. I watched on the grainy 4K feed as a woman in a business suit, her throat torn open, twitched and jerked upright. She stood, swaying on broken heels, then turned and joined the pack, throwing themselves against the glass of the retail storefronts. But it wasn't just the lobby. I cycled the cameras. Elevator cab 4 stopped between floors 12 and 13. Inside, 6 people were trapped. The walls were painted with blood. One infected. A man in a maintenance uniform was tearing into a screaming woman, while the others huddled in the corners, pounding on the doors. There was nowhere for them to go. It was a steel coffin. Stairwell B, floor 20, a stampede. People were falling, trampling each other in a desperate bid to go up. But the infected were faster. I saw them leaping over the railings, dropping onto the fleeing crowd from above, biting faces, fingers, anything they could reach. Then I saw the perimeter cameras. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling from her post by the door. "The building," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "The lockdown. It didn't just seal the lobby. The spire was designed post 9/11, upgraded after every major urban terror attack in the last decade. It had an automated threat containment protocol. If the sensors detected mass violence, gunshots, or an explosion in the lobby, the building went into a hard seal to prevent the threat from spreading to the city, or the city from spreading to the building. "The blast shutters are down," I said, pulling up the schematic. "Ground floor, mezzanine, parking garage exits. Heavy steel shutters, 2 inches thick. They dropped automatically when the panic started." "That keeps them out, right?" Sarah asked, a sliver of hope in her voice. "That keeps the infected on the street out?" "Yes," I said, staring at the screen where a sea of infected were hammering uselessly against the exterior shutters. "But it also locks us in. And the infected are already inside, Sarah. We're not in a fortress. We're in a pressure cooker." I cycled to the upper floors, the executive levels, floors 80 through 90. The feed there was disturbingly calm, pristine hallways, empty reception desks. The soundproofing and the sheer height had insulated them from the chaos below. They were drinking their coffee, answering emails, completely unaware that the foundation of their world was being eaten alive. "We need to move," I said, grabbing my bag. "We can't stay here." "Why not?" Sarah asked, looking around the mechanical room. "It's locked. It's safe. You have water here, right? You said you had water." "I have water for 3 days," I said. "But look at the thermal readings." I pointed to a graph on the center monitor. "Fire on floors 3, 5, and 8. Someone dropped a cigarette, or a car crashed in the garage, or a kitchen grease fire went unchecked. The suppression systems are overwhelmed. The smoke is going to rise. If the fire doesn't get us, the carbon monoxide will." Also, there was the noise. The turbines masked our sound for now, but eventually, the grid would fail. When these machines died, the silence would be deafening, and in the silence, the infected would hear us breathing. "Where do we go?" Sarah asked. "The roof," I said. "It's the only way out. We signal for extraction, the National Guard, a news chopper, private evac. Someone will be flying." "But the elevators." She glanced at the screen showing the bloodbath in cab 4. "We don't take the main banks," I said. "We take the service core. It has a manual override. I can drive it from inside the cab, but we need authorization to access the roof. The blast doors on the helipad are bio-coded. Only the CEO and the head of security can open them." "Price," Sarah said. "CEO Jonathan Price. He's on 90, the penthouse office." "Then we go to 90, I said. "We get his key card, or his thumb, or whatever is left of him, and we open the roof." I moved to the door, checking the corridor on the monitor one last time. Empty, for now. "Sarah, listen to me," I said, gripping her shoulder. "We are going to walk out this door. We are going to the service elevator down the hall. You stay behind me. You do not scream. You do not run unless I tell you to. If I shoot, you plug your ears and keep moving. If I fall, I paused, looking at the crowbar hooked on my belt and the Glock in my hand. If I fall, you take the gun, you aim for the head, and you don't stop pulling the trigger until the slide locks back. Do you understand? She nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. I threw the deadbolt. The corridor outside was dimly lit, the emergency power casting everything in a sickly amber hue. The air was cooler here, but it carried a smell that turned my stomach, the metallic tang of blood mixed with the sulfurous stench of the infected. We moved fast. My boots were soft-soled tactical gear, silent on the concrete. Sarah's heels clicked like gunshots. "Take them off," I whispered, gesturing to her shoes. She kicked them off without hesitation, running in her stocking feet. We reached the service elevator. I pried the panel open and punched in the engineer's override code. The doors slid open, instantly empty. Thank God. We stepped inside. It was a freight elevator, lined with padded blankets to protect the walls during moves. It smelled of dust and old cargo. I used my key to engage the manual drive. "Going up," I said, pushing the lever forward. The elevator groaned, a deep mechanical shudder that vibrated through the floor. We began to rise. 41, 42, 43. I watched the floor indicator, my heart rate sinking with the flashing numbers. Every floor we passed was a potential tomb. Every ding of the bell was a Russian roulette trigger pull. "Elias," Sarah whispered, "do you think my team, do you think anyone on 50 made it out?" "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't do the math on people you can't see. Assume they're gone. It's cleaner." It was a lie, of course. It wasn't cleaner. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that sat on your chest and made it hard to breathe. But hope was a luxury we couldn't afford. The elevator slowed as we hit the 80s. The air pressure changed, my ears popping. "We're stopping at 88, I said. "The executive reception. Price's office is a private stairwell, up from there. We go in, we find him, we get the access, we go to the roof." The elevator shuddered to a halt at 88. The doors opened. The contrast was jarring. Down below, it was industrial hell. Here, it was a sanctuary of wealth. Thick white carpet, walls of glass overlooking the burning city, modern art that cost more than my lifetime earnings hanging on the walls, and it was quiet. Too quiet. "Hello," Sarah called out, her voice cracking. "Quiet," I hissed, grabbing her arm. We stepped out into the reception area. The desk was empty. A phone was ringing somewhere in the back offices. A lonely, persistent trill that Naomi was answering. "Where is everyone?" Sarah whispered. "In the boardroom," I said, pointing to the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. Morning briefing. 8:30 a.m., Tuesday. We moved toward the doors. I could hear voices now. Muffled, angry voices. Denial. I pushed the doors open. The boardroom was packed. 20 people in suits sat around a massive oval table. At the head sat Jonathan Price, a silver-haired lion of industry, who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. He was shouting into a satellite phone. "I don't care what the news says. I want the chopper here 5 minutes ago. We have a situation in the lobby, and I am not waiting for the..." He stopped as he saw us, saw the blood on Sarah's clothes, saw the crowbar in my belt, and the gun in my hand. "Vance?" Price lowered the phone. "What the hell is the meaning of this? Why are you armed? And why is my VP of marketing barefoot and covered in blood?" "Mr. Jod?" "Price," I said, stepping into the room. "We need to evacuate, now. The building is compromised." "Compromised?" Price scoffed, standing up. "It's a riot, Vance. I saw the news. Some drug-crazed lunatics in the lobby. Security has locked the doors. We are perfectly safe up here. This is the most secure building in Chicago. It's not a riot, Sarah said, stepping out from behind me. Her voice was shaking, but clear. They're eating people, Jonathan. I saw it. Miller turned into one of them. Elias had to. She choked on the words. Miller? Price frowned. The fat guard? Vance, did you hurt an employee? He was infected, I said, walking toward the table. Listen to me closely. The infection spreads in minutes. It's in the stairwells. It's in the elevators. The fire suppression systems are failing on the lower levels. We have maybe 20 minutes before the smoke reaches this floor or the infected break through the fire doors. A murmur went through the room. The junior VPs looked nervous, exchanging glances, but Price slammed his hand on the table. Enough. I am not abandoning a billion-dollar asset because the janitor panicked. Security is handling it. We wait for the police. The police aren't coming, I shouted, losing my patience. Look out the window, Price. Look at the city. I pointed to the floor-to-ceiling glass. From this height, you could see the grid of Chicago. And you could see the smoke, dozens of black columns rising like pillars of a temple. You could see the gridlock on the highways, the tiny flashing lights of emergency vehicles stuck in the crush. Price looked. For a second, his mask slipped. He saw the burning world. We need the roof access, I said, pressing the advantage. Your biometric override. We open the helipad. We signal for extraction. It's the only way. Price looked at me, then at the phone in his hand. My pilot is inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Good, I said. Then let's get upstairs. Price hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But you put that gun away, Vance. You're scaring the board. I didn't holster the gun. I kept it low, ready. We moved toward the private stairwell at the back of the room that led to the 90th floor and the roof access. Price led the way, followed by his sycophants, then me and Sarah. We were halfway up the spiral staircase when the building shook. It wasn't an explosion, it was an impact. Something heavy hitting the structure. Then came the sound. Thump, thump, thump. From the main hallway we had just left. What was that? One of the board members asked. I spun around, looking back down into the reception area through the open boardroom doors. The elevator doors, the main passenger elevators we had avoided, were dinging. A cheerful, welcoming chime. Ding. The doors slid open. They didn't walk out, they spilled out. A wave of bodies pressed so tight against the doors that they tumbled over each other like water bursting from a dam, infected. Dozens of them. Men in suits, women in dresses, delivery workers, security guards. All of them bleeding black, all of them screaming. They had ridden the elevator up, packed in like sardines, tearing at each other in the dark. And now they were free. Run, I screamed. Get to the roof. Panic erupted. The board members scrambled up the stairs, pushing and shoving. Price was fast for an old man, sprinting up the steps. I grabbed Sarah and shoved her ahead of me. Go, don't look back. I turned and raised the Glock. The infected were pouring into the boardroom. They saw the fleeing suits. They smelled the fresh meat. I fired. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, 2 hits. One infected dropped, sliding across the polished table. Another stumbled. But there were too many, a tide of gnashing teeth and flailing limbs. I turned and ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I reached the top floor 90. Price was at the heavy steel door to the roof, slamming his hand against the biometric scanner. Come on, he screamed. The light blinked red. Access denied. Try it again, I shouted, reaching the landing. Price slammed his hand down again. Access denied. System lockdown in effect. It's the building, I realized, the horror washing over me cold and absolute. The threat containment protocol. It locked the roof too. It sealed the whole structure to prevent an aerial breach. "Override it," Price yelled at me. "You're the engineer. Fix it." "I can't override a bio-coated hard seal from here. I need the mainframe in the basement." Below us, the screams began. The infected had caught the stragglers on the stairs. I heard bones snapping. I heard the wet tearing of fabric and flesh. We were trapped. The roof was locked. The stairs were flooding with the dead. The elevator was a death trap. Into the office. I pointed to Price's office suite. "Heavy doors. Move." We scrambled into the penthouse office. Me, Sarah, Price, and 3 terrified board members. I slammed the mahogany doors shut. They were heavy. Solid wood, but they weren't steel. I dragged a massive oak bookshelf across the floor, jamming it against the door. "That won't hold them," Sarah whispered, backing away toward the window. "It will hold them for a minute," I said, looking around the room. "We need another way out." "There is no other way," Price yelled, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter with shaking hands. "We're 90 floors up. We're dead. We're all dead." I looked at the window. The city burned below us. The smoke swirled around the glass. Then I looked at the ventilation grate in the ceiling. High-velocity air return. "Big enough for a man." "The vents," I said. "The main intake for the penthouse is huge. It drops straight down to the mechanical chase." "You want us to crawl," Price spat. "I am the CEO of this company." Thud. A body hit the door, then another. The wood groaned. The scratching started dozens of fingernails clawing at the finish. "You're not a CEO anymore, Price," I said, jumping onto his desk and using the crowbar to pry the grate loose. "You're just calories. Now get up here or get eaten." I ripped the grate down. It clattered to the floor. "Sarah, up first," I ordered. I cupped my hands. She stepped into them, and I hoisted her into the duct. "It's dark," she called down, "and it's hot. Keep moving. There's a ladder about 20 feet in. It goes down the spine of the building." I helped the 3 board members up. They were weeping, useless, but I pushed them into the hole. Price looked at the door. It was bowing inward. The hinges were screaming. "My scotch," he muttered, downing the glass. Then he climbed onto the desk. I pushed him up. I was the last one on the floor. The door cracked down the center. A hand, black, withered, dripping, punched through the wood. An eye stared at me through the gap. A white, dead eye. I scrambled into the vent. I pulled the grate back into place, just as the door exploded inward. The roar of the horde filled the office below. I could hear them tearing the furniture apart, searching for the meat they could smell but couldn't reach. I turned on the flashlight on my Glock. The beam cut through the dusty, metallic air of the duct. "Where does this go?" Sarah's voice echoed from ahead. "Down," I said. "All the way down. Past the fire, past the infected, to the only place left." "The lobby?" she asked. "No," I said, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. "The lobby is a kill box. The roof is sealed. The only way out of the spire is the old maintenance tunnels in the sub-basement. We have to go back to the beginning." "But that's 93 floors down," she whispered. "I know," I said, starting to crawl. "Don't look down, Sarah. Just keep moving." We were in the veins of the monster now, and the monster was sick. From below us, deep in the shaft, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. It wasn't the infected. It was the groan of metal under extreme stress. The fires on the lower levels were weakening the steel. The spire wasn't just infested, it was dying. "Move," I shouted, the echo bouncing off the tin walls. "Move fast." We crawled into the darkness, leaving the sky behind, descending into the throat of the burning world. The darkness of the HVAC duct was absolute, a suffocating blanket of dust and recycled air that tasted of copper and old panic. My knees scraped against the galvanized steel with every inch of progress, a rhythmic agonizing shuffle that echoed too loudly in the confined space. Behind me, I could hear the ragged breathing of Jonathan Price, the man who owned this building, sounding less like a titan of industry and more like a dying engine. "Move," I whispered, the sound vibrating through the metal walls. "Don't stop. If you stop, you die." Ahead of me, Sarah was a silhouette of determination. I could see the soles of her stocking feet pushing against the ridges of the ductwork, slipping in the layer of grime that had accumulated over a decade of deferred maintenance. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't asking for a break. She understood the math. The math was simple. Distance equals survival. Every foot we put between us and the penthouse was a variable shifted in our favor. Above us, muffled by the layers of steel and insulation, the slaughter continued. It sounded distant, like a party in a neighbor's apartment. But I knew what the wet thuds and high-pitched shrieks represented. The board of directors was being liquidated. The infected, the things, were tearing through the mahogany doors and the barricades we'd left behind. They were consuming the brain trust of Ethelgard Corp, turning billion-dollar educations into protein. We reached the junction for the main vertical chase. It was a vertical shaft that ran the spine of the spire, housing the high-voltage bus ducts, the fiber-optic backbones, and the emergency maintenance ladders. "It's a drop," I whispered to Sarah, shining the beam of my tactical light into the void. 90 floors. Straight down." "We can't climb down 90 floors," Sarah hissed, wiping sweat and soot from her forehead. "My hands are shaking, Elias. I can barely hold on." "We don't have to go all 90, I lied. "We just need to get below the fire line, find a service corridor that isn't choked with smoke, and traverse to the B stairwell. But we can't stay in the ducts. The fire on the lower levels, heat rises. This whole system is going to turn into a convection oven in about 20 minutes. I swung myself out of the horizontal duct and onto the steel ladder bolted to the concrete wall of the shaft. The air here was hotter, carrying the acrid, chemical sting of burning plastic and melting insulation. It was a smell I knew well, Class C electrical fire. The building wasn't just burning, its nervous system was frying. "Come on," I signaled to Price and the 3 surviving board members, 2 men in their 50s, soft hands and expensive watches, and a woman named Linda, who had lost a shoe and was weeping silently. Price crawled out of the duct, his suit ruined, his face a mask of indignation and terror. "Vance, this is unacceptable. The heat. I can't breathe in here." "Then stop breathing," I said, starting the descent. "Gravity doesn't care about your stock options, Jonathan. Grab the ladder." We began the climb down. It was a slow, torturous process. 1 rung at a time. My boots rang against the steel. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was too loud, echoing down the shaft like a dinner bell, but we had no choice. Speed was life, but silence was security. We were trading one for the other. Floor 89, floor 88, floor 87. My shoulders burned. The bag of gear on my back felt like it weighed a ton, the jerry cans of water and the ammunition dragging me toward the earth. But I didn't drop it. That bag was my life support. Without it, I was just another casualty waiting to happen. By the time we reached the 70th floor, the heat was becoming oppressive. The air in the shaft was shimmering, creating a mirage effect that made the ladder below look like it was twisting. "I can't," Linda gasped from above me. "My hands, they're slipping." "Lock your elbows," I called up, not stopping. "Wrap your arms through the rungs. Don't rely on your grip strength." "I can't." There was a scuffle of movement, a sharp intake of breath, and then a scream that started high and ended abruptly. I looked up just in time to see a shape plummeting past me in the darkness. Linda fell silently after the initial scream, her body tumbling through the void, bouncing off the conduit pipes with wet, sickening thuds. She fell past me, past Sarah, down into the abyss. Seconds later, There was a distant final crack from somewhere far below. "Don't look," I commanded, my voice echoing off the concrete. "Keep moving." "She's dead," one of the board members, Jenkins I think, whimpered. "She just fell." "The math," I muttered to myself. -1. Less noise. Less oxygen consumed. Pure variables. It was a cold thought, a monstrous thought, but it was the only way to keep my hands from shaking. I couldn't save Linda. I couldn't catch a falling body in a maintenance shaft. Physics didn't allow for heroism. We kept moving. Around floor 65, the smoke changed. It wasn't just the smell anymore. It was a physical presence. A thin gray haze was drifting up the shaft, stinging my eyes and coating my throat with ash. "We have to get out," I coughed, pulling the collar of my shirt over my nose. "The smoke is too thick below. We need to exit the shaft." "Where?" Sarah choked out, coughing violently below me. "Floor 60, I said, "the sky lobby. It's a transfer floor, high ceilings, glass walls. It should be clear of smoke for now. We can reassess there." I slid down the rails, skipping rungs, risking a fall to gain speed. I reached the service hatch for the 60th floor. It was warm to the touch. I braced my legs against the ladder, unhooked the crowbar, and jammed the tip into the latch mechanism. With a grunt of effort, I torqued the bar. The latch snapped. "Cheap alloy, thank you, cost-cutting measures," and the door swung outward. Cooler air rushed in. Thank God. I scrambled through the hatch and rolled onto the carpeted floor of the sky lobby, weapon drawn. "Clear," I whispered, sweeping the room. Sarah tumbled out after me, gasping for air, her face streaked with soot and tears. Then Price, then Jenkins in the other suit. A guy named Miller. No, not Miller. Miller was dead. This guy was Daniels. We were in the sky lobby. It was a massive, open-air atrium that spanned 3 floors, designed to impress visitors and host corporate galas. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of Chicago. A grand staircase swept down to a bistro and a lounge area. It was empty. The emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows across the plush furniture and the abstract sculptures. "We stop here," I said, checking the corners. 5 minutes. We catch our breath, we check our gear, and we figure out the next move. Price collapsed onto a leather sofa, loosening his tie. "My God," he wheezed. "Linda, she's just gone." I ignored him and walked to the glass wall. I needed to see it. I needed to know the scale of the variable I was solving for. I looked out. The golden hour was over. The sun was fully up, casting a harsh, indifferent light on the end of the world. Chicago was burning. It wasn't just a few fires. The entire grid was a patchwork of devastation. I saw thick columns of black smoke rising from the Loop, from the Gold Coast, from River North. The highways were parking lots of abandoned steel, the red taillights stretching for miles like arteries of clotted blood. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. "Look at the Navy Pier," I whispered. Sarah joined me at the window. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The Ferris wheel was motionless, but the pier itself was swarming. From this height, they looked like ants, a black mass of movement shifting and pulsing. They were pushing people into the lake. I could see the tiny splashes, hundreds of them, as the crowd was driven off the edge by the infected. "The military?" Sarah asked, scanning the sky. "Where are they?" "Look down," I said, pointing to the streets below us. National Guard trucks were scattered at the intersections, burning. A tank in actual Abrams tank sat motionless on Michigan Avenue, its turret twisted at an odd angle, swarmed by hundreds of infected who were trying to claw their way inside. "They tried to hold the line," I said, analyzing the scene with a detached professional eye. "They set up checkpoints, choke points, but they didn't understand the viral load. They let people close. They tried to triage. And then one person turned inside the perimeter, and the geometric progression took over. You can't shoot a virus, Sarah. Not when the virus is wearing your neighbor's face. So no one is coming, Daniels said, his voice hollow. He was standing behind us, staring at the carnage. We're on our own. We've always been on our own, I said, turning back to the group. The system is a fragile illusion. It broke at 8:30 a.m. Now we are just biology fighting physics. We need a plan, Price said, standing up. He had regained some of his composure, the arrogance seeping back into his voice like a returning infection. Vance, you said the sub-basement. Why? Why go down when the city is dead? Because the spire connects to the old Chicago freight tunnels, I explained, pulling up the mental schematic. They run deep, 60 feet below the street. They connect to the pedway system, but they have isolation gates. If we can get into the freight tunnels, we can move underground. We can get to the lakefront, maybe find a boat. The water is the only safe zone. That's suicide, Price spat, walking through the dark. We should stay here. This floor is secure. We have food in the bistro. We have water. We have smoke, I corrected, pointing to the vents in the ceiling. Thin wisps of gray were already curling out of the returns. The fire is climbing the elevator shafts. It's bypassing the dampers. In an hour, this floor will be a gas chamber. We have to keep moving down. I'm not going back in that shaft, Jenkins said, shaking his head. I won't do it. I saw Linda fall. I can't. Then you stay here and die, I said simply. That's your choice. But I'm leaving. I checked my Glock, 12 rounds in the magazine. 2 spares, 36 rounds total. Plus the crowbar. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Wait, Sarah whispered. She held up a hand. Do you hear that? The room went silent. At first I heard nothing but the distant roar of the fire and the wind whistling around. The exterior glass, then I heard it. Click, click, click. It was the sound of hard heels on marble, coming from the grand staircase that led up to the 61st floor, the executive gym and spa. I raised the weapon. Get behind me, I signaled. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was a man. He was wearing expensive gym clothes, Under Armour, Nikes. He was huge, a bodybuilder physique. He stood at the top of the stairs, swaying slightly. His skin was gray, the veins standing out in stark black relief against his biceps. He wasn't looking at us. He was staring at the wall, twitching. It's Todd, Daniels whispered, head of acquisitions. Todd. Hey Todd, it's us. Shut up, I hissed, spinning on Daniels, but it was too late. The sound was out. Todd's head snapped toward us. The movement was so violent I heard the vertebrae crack. His eyes were white voids. His mouth was smeared with something dark and wet. He let out a low, rattling growl that escalated into a scream. And then, he started to run. He didn't run like a man. He ran like a machine that had bypassed its safety governors. He vaulted the railing, dropping 20 feet to the lobby floor, landing in a crouch that would have shattered a normal person's knees. He absorbed the impact and sprang forward without a pause. Fire! Price screamed, shoving me forward. Shoot him. I lined up the shot, center mass. Bang! The bullet hit him in the chest. A puff of gray dust from his shirt. He didn't even slow down. The hydrostatic shock of a 9mm round meant nothing to a nervous system that felt no pain. Head, I reminded myself. The math. Disconnect the CPU. I adjusted my aim. But Todd was fast. He was closing the distance. 30 feet. 20, and he wasn't alone. From the top of the stairs, more figures poured out. Women in yoga pants, men in towels. The morning workout crew. They swarmed down the stairs like a waterfall of meat. Run, I shouted. To the service corridor. The kitchen. We broke. I fired 2 more shots as I backpedaled. One connected, a lucky hit that took the top of a woman's head off. She dropped, sliding across the polished floor. Todd was on us. He ignored me. He went for the slowest target, Jenkins. Jenkins turned to run, but he tripped on a decorative rug. He scrambled, trying to get up, screaming for help. "Help me! Price, help me!" Price looked at him. He was 5 feet away. He could have grabbed Jenkins' hand. He could have pulled him up. Instead, Price kicked Jenkins in the shoulder, knocking him back down to create an obstacle between himself and the hunter. "No!" Sarah screamed. Todd hit Jenkins like a freight train. There was a wet crunch as they collided. Jenkins's scream was cut short as Todd's teeth found his throat. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, painting the abstract art on the wall in vivid crimson. "Move!" I grabbed Sarah's collar and hauled her toward the kitchen doors. Price and Daniels were ahead of us, sprinting through the double doors. We followed, slamming them shut behind us. I jammed the crowbar through the handles, barring the door just as the first body hit it from the other side. Thud, thud, thud. The doors bowed. The glass windows in the doors spiderwebbed. Through the cracks, I could see them piling up, climbing over Jenkins's body to get to the fresh meat. "We need to go down," I yelled, scanning the kitchen. It was a stainless steel maze of prep tables and ovens. "The service elevator here. It goes to the loading dock in the basement." We ran through the kitchen. Pots and pans clattered to the floor as we brushed past them. Price was already at the elevator, hammering the call button. "It's not coming," I shouted. "The power is out on the local banks. We need the stairs." "I am not taking the stairs," Price roared, his face purple. "I pay you to fix this, Vance. Fix it." "I can't fix the apocalypse, Jonathan." I slammed him against the wall, the Glock pressed under his chin. The cold steel focused him. His eyes went wide. "The elevators are coffins. The stairs are the only way. Now move your ass or I leave you here for Todd." Price swallowed. He nodded. We hit the stairwell door at the back of the kitchen. I opened it cautiously. Smoke. Thick, billowing black smoke rolled out, hitting us like a physical blow. The heat was intense. "We can't go down," Daniels coughed, backing away. "It's a chimney. The fire is right below us." I looked at the landing. We were on 60. The smoke was coming from 58 and 59. The fire had jumped the containment. "Up?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "No," I said. "Up is a dead end. We have to go through." "Through the fire?" Price shrieked. "Through the floor," I said, closing the door to cut off the smoke. We crossed the 60th floor to the south side. There's a secondary stairwell, the fire escape for the gym. If the fire started on the north face, the south might still be clear. But the infected, Daniels pointed back toward the lobby doors, where the crowbar was bending under the strain. "We have to go around them," I said. "Through the vents again?" "No. No time. The ceiling plenum." I pointed to the drop ceiling. "It's not rated for weight, but the structural beams are." We climb up. We crawl over the kitchen. We drop down on the other side of the lobby, near the south exit. "You're insane," Price muttered. "I'm alive," I countered. "And Jenkins is dead. That's the only metric that matters." The kitchen doors groaned. A hand punched through the safety glass, black blood dripping from the jagged stump of a wrist. "Up!" I grabbed a prep table and dragged it under a missing ceiling tile. "Sarah, go. Follow the beams. Don't put your weight on the tiles." Sarah climbed up. She disappeared into the crawl space. "Daniels, you're next." Daniels scrambled up. "Price." Price looked at the door. It was buckling. The hinges were popping. He looked at me, hate and fear warring in his eyes. He climbed onto the table. I handed him up. I was about to climb when the kitchen doors gave way. The crowbar snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The doors flew open. They poured in. Todd was in the lead, his face a mask of blood, Jenkins's blood. I didn't have time to climb. "Pull me up." I jumped, grabbing the steel framing of the ceiling grid. Sarah and Daniels grabbed my arms. They hauled. I kicked my legs as a hand swiped at my boots. I felt fingernails scratch against the leather. I pulled myself into the dark, dusty crawl space just as the kitchen filled with the horde. I lay on the beam, gasping for air, looking down through the gaps in the tiles. They were thrashing below us, overturning tables, sniffing the air. "They can smell us," I whispered. "Don't bleed. Don't sweat. Just move." We crawled. The metal grid dug into my knees. The air was hot, stagnant, and filled with dust. Below us, the monsters paced, their growls vibrating through the floor. We reached the south side of the building. The drop-down was into a utility corridor. I kicked a tile out. I dropped first, weapon ready. Clear. The others dropped down. We found the south stairwell. I put my hand on the door. It was warm, but not hot. "It's clear," I said, "for now." I opened the door. The air was hazy but breathable. "We go down," I said. 50 floors to the ground, then 3 more to the sub-basement. "And then?" Sarah asked, wiping grime from her face. "And then we enter the tunnels," I said, "and we pray that the rats are the only things living down there." I looked at Price. He was staring at his Rolex, wiping a smudge of blood from the crystal. He was checking the time. "What time is it?" I asked. 10 a.m., he whispered. "The market just opened." I almost laughed. It was a hysterical bubbling sound in my chest. The market. Money. "The market is closed, Jonathan," I said, checking the magazine of my Glock. "The currency has changed." I looked at the group. Daniels was shaking. Sarah was hardened, her eyes cold. Price was a ticking time bomb. "Lead, follow, or get out of the way," I said. "We're burning daylight." We began the descent, step by step, into the smoke, into the dark. The golden hour was over. Now, we were in the long, dark shadow of the end. And the math was getting harder with every floor. The south stairwell was a concrete throat, gray and cold, spiraling down into the darkness. The emergency lights had failed somewhere around the 50th floor, leaving us in a gloom broken only by the thin, trembling beam of my tactical light. The air was getting heavier with every flight we descended. A cocktail of smoke, sweat, and that distinct metallic tang of blood that never seemed to leave the back of my throat. 59, 58, 57. My boots, the soft-soled tactical ones I'd bought online 3 years ago, made almost no sound on the concrete. But the others? Price's dress shoes clacked like hammers. Daniels was wheezing, a wet, rattling sound in his chest that echoed off the walls. Sarah was silent, moving like a ghost, her bare feet bloody but steady. "Slow down," Price gasped, grabbing the railing. I need a minute." "You don't have a minute," I whispered, not stopping. "You have seconds. Keep moving." We passed the door to the 45th floor. Someone had painted, "Help us," on the steel, in what looked like lipstick, but the letters trailed off into a smear of red that wasn't makeup. I didn't stop to look. Curiosity was a luxury. Survival was a discipline. Around the 30th floor, the noise started. It wasn't the roar of the fire or the scream of the infected. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat in the walls. Thump, thump, thump. "What is that?" Daniels asked, his voice trembling. I stopped, holding up a fist. The group froze. I pressed my ear against the concrete wall. The vibration was stronger here. "It's the generators," I said, the realization hitting me. "The backups in the sub-basement, they're straining. They're trying to power the life safety systems, but the load is too high. If they fail, the ventilation stops. The smoke stops moving. We suffocate." "We have to hurry," Sarah said, her voice hard. We picked up the pace. 20, 9:28. At floor 22, the stairwell ended. Not a door. A blockage. Furniture desks, chairs, filing cabinets had been piled high against the landing. A barricade built in panic, but it had collapsed inward, crushed by something massive, and amidst the wreckage lay the bodies, dozens of them. Office workers who had tried to hold the line, they were torn apart, limbs scattered like discarded mannequins. The smell was overpowering voided bowels and rot, accelerated by the heat rising from below. "Oh God," Daniels retched, turning away. "Don't look," I said, shining the light away from the carnage. "Climb over. Don't touch anything wet." I went first, testing the stability of the pile. A desk shifted under my weight, groaning. I vaulted over a filing cabinet, my boot landing in something soft that squelched. I ignored it. I helped Sarah over. She was light, efficient. Then Daniels. Price hesitated. He was staring at a body near the bottom of the pile, a woman in a blue dress, her face gone. That's my secretary," he whispered. "Maria." "She's not Maria anymore," I said, grabbing his arm and hauling him over. "She's an obstacle. Move." We cleared the blockage and kept descending. The air was getting hotter now. The fire was close. I checked the door on floor 15. It was hot to the touch. Smoke was seeping through the frame, black tendrils curling like snakes. "The fire has jumped to the south side," I said. "We can't stay in the stairwell much longer. The heat will cook us." "We have to get to the lobby," Price said. "The main doors. The lobby is sealed," I reminded him, "and it's full of them. We need to get to the basement access on the ground floor, behind the security desk. It leads to the freight elevators and the tunnel entrance." We reached floor 10. The heat was intense, a physical weight pressing on my chest. Daniels was coughing violently now, doubled over. "I can't," he wheezed. "My chest." "Breathe through your shirt," I ordered. "Filter the particulate." We hit the ground floor landing. The door to the lobby was steel, heavy, fire-rated. I put my hand on the handle. It was vibrating. From the other side came the sound of a meat grinder. Screams, growls, the tearing of flesh. The infected were in a frenzy. "We can't go out there," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide in the gloom. "We have to cross it," I said. 20 yards. From this door to the security office." "That's it. 20 yards. There are hundreds of them," Price hissed. "They're distracted," I said, hoping I was right. "They're feeding. Or they're fighting the shutters. We move low. We move fast. And we don't engage unless we have to." I checked the Glock. 9 rounds left in the mag. 2 spares. 27 chances. "Ready?" I pushed the door open. The noise hit us first, a wall of sound. The lobby was a war zone. The emergency lights flickered, casting strobe-like flashes over the horror. The floor was a lake of blood. Bodies were everywhere. The infected were feasting, huddled in packs over the fallen. Others were throwing themselves against the steel shutters covering the main entrance, their bones breaking with each impact. But they didn't stop. We slipped out, staying low behind a row of decorative planters. The smell was atrocious, copper and bile. "Keep moving," I mouthed. We crawled. My knees slid in the blood. I felt a piece of glass cut through my tactical pants, biting into my skin. But I didn't flinch. We were halfway to the security office when Daniels knocked over a vase. It shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. Every head in the lobby turned. For a second, there was silence. Just the hum of the dying building. Then, a collective shriek. "Run!" I screamed, abandoning stealth. We sprinted. 3 infected broke from the pack near the reception desk. They were fast runners. One of them, a security guard still wearing his tactical vest, lunged for Price. Price shrieked and shoved Daniels. It was instinct. Pure cowardice. He pushed Daniels directly into the guard's path. "No!" Daniels screamed as the infected tackled him. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The guard's teeth found Daniels' face. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I grabbed Sarah and shoved her toward the security office door. Price was right behind us, panting like a dog. I turned at the door, raising the Glock. 2 more were closing in. Bang, bang. One dropped, a hole in its forehead. The other stumbled, hit in the shoulder, but kept coming. I fired again. Bang. It dropped. I slammed the security office door and threw the deadbolt. A second later, a body hit it. Then another. They were piling up against the wood. "You killed him," Sarah screamed, turning on Price. She shoved him hard. "You pushed him. You murdered him." "He was dead anyway," Price yelled back, his face slick with sweat. "He was slowing us down. I did what I had to do." "Shut up," I roared, leveling the gun at Price. "Both of you, shut up." The room went silent, save for the pounding on the door and Daniel's screams from the lobby, which were mercifully cut short. I looked at Price. I wanted to pull the trigger. Every fiber of my being wanted to end him right there. He was a liability, a cancer, but the math said I needed bodies. If we ran into a pack, Price was one more target that wasn't Sarah or me. "Get to the back," I said, lowering the gun but keeping my finger on the guard. "The freight elevator access is through the break room." We moved into the back. The security office was a mess of monitors and papers. On the screens, I could see the lobby. It was a sea of movement. They were tearing Daniels apart. We reached the freight elevator. I hit the button. Nothing. Power was gone. "The stairs," I said, pointing to the service door. "Sub-basement access." We went down. The air got cooler, damp. The smell of ozone returned. We reached the sub-basement landing. This was it, the bottom of the world. I opened the door. Water. The sub-basement was flooded. 3 feet of dark, oily water swirled around the concrete pillars. The pumps had failed. "Great," Price muttered. "Just great." "It's water," I said. "It won't kill you. Walk." I stepped in. The water was freezing. It soaked my pants instantly, chilling me to the bone. "The tunnel access is on the far wall," I said, shining my light across the dark lake. "About 50 yards. We waded in. The water was thick, resistant. Debris floated past cardboard boxes, hard hats, a chair. We were halfway across when I saw the ripples. Not from us, from the shadows between the pillars. "Stop," I whispered. We froze. Something was moving in the water. Something big. Is it them?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Sleepers," I realized. "The cold water, it slows them down. Dormant state." I shone the light toward the ripples. A head broke the surface. Pale, bloated, eyes white. It was just standing there, submerged to the neck, swaying with the current. Then another head, and another. They were everywhere. A forest of the dead, standing silently in the black water. "Don't splash," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. "Don't make a sound. If we wake them." We moved inches at a time. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would vibrate the water. Price slipped. He went under with a splash. He came up sputtering, gasping for air. "Quiet," I hissed, but it was too late. The forest woke up. Every head turned toward us. A low, collective moan vibrated through the room, amplified by the water. Then they started to move. Not fast, the water dragged at them, but relentless. They churned toward us, a tidal wave of gray flesh. "Go," I shouted. "Run." It's hard to run in 3 feet of water. It's a nightmare. Your legs feel like lead. Every step is a battle. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled. We surged forward, fighting the resistance. Price was behind us, struggling. "Wait, wait for me." An infected lunged from the water in front of me. I didn't have time to shoot. I swung the empty jerry can I still had strapped to my bag. Why hadn't I dropped it and smashed it into the thing's face? It went down with a splash. We reached the far wall. The tunnel access grate was there. Massive steel rusted. I grabbed the wheel lock. It wouldn't budge. "It's jammed," I yelled, putting my back into it. "Open it," Price screamed. He was 10 feet back. The horde was closing in on him. Hands were grabbing at his suit. "Help me," I shouted at Sarah. She grabbed the wheel. We pulled together. 1, 2, 3, it groaned. Rust flaked off. It turned an inch. Again. Another inch. Price fired a gun. Where did he get a gun? A small silver pistol. He fired wildly into the water. "Stay back," he shrieked. One of them grabbed his leg. He went down. "Vance!" he screamed. "Vance!" I looked back. He was disappearing under the water. The dark shapes were swarming him. Bubbles rose to the surface, pink with blood. "He's gone," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Open the door." We heaved. The wheel spun. The lock disengaged. I kicked the grate open. We fell into the tunnel beyond, dry concrete. I slammed the grate shut just as a hand reached through. I spun the wheel, locking it. The face of an infected pressed against the bars, snarling, teeth snapping inches from my nose, then another face and another. They piled up against the grate, a wall of hate. I slumped against the tunnel wall, gasping. My legs were shaking so bad I couldn't stand. "We made it," Sarah whispered. I checked the Glock. 4 rounds. "We're not out yet," I said. "This is just the freight tunnel. We have miles to go." I looked down the tunnel. It stretched into darkness, silent, smelling of old dust and rats. "Check your gear," I said, the routine grounding me. Water, ammo, injuries, scratches, no bites. I checked myself. A cut on my leg from the glass, nothing deep. "We keep moving," I said. "The lake is east. We head east." We walked. The silence of the tunnel was heavy, oppressive. After the chaos of the spire, the quiet felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. We walked for an hour. My watch said 11:30 a.m. Then we saw the light, not daylight, firelight. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber, a junction. And in the center of the junction, someone had built a fire. Silhouettes moved around it. "Survivors?" Sarah asked, hope creeping into her voice. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe something worse." I killed my light. We crept forward, hugging the wall. There were 3 of them, men, wearing mismatched tactical gear, police vests, military pants, civilian jackets. They were armed. AR-15s, shotguns. They weren't military. They weren't police. They were laughing. One of them kicked something on the ground. "A body. Check his pockets," one of the men said. "See if he had any smokes." "Looters," I whispered. "Gangs. They moved into the tunnels when the city fell." "We have to go back," Sarah said. "We can't," I said. "The spire is sealed. The water is full of sleepers. This is the only way." "They have guns, Elias. Big guns." "I know." I looked at the Glock. 4 rounds. "The math," I whispered. 3 targets. 4 rounds. Surprise is the only variable. "You can't take them," Sarah said, gripping my arm. "I don't have to take them," I said, scanning the chamber. "I just have to distract them." I saw it then. Along the wall of the junction, a gas main. Yellow pipe, industrial valve. And right next to it, a cluster of electrical conduit that had been ripped open. Wires exposed. "Gas," I said. If I can open that valve and spark it, Sarah asked. You'll blow us up. Not if we're in the side tunnel, I said. The blast will go down the path of least resistance, the main shaft. It's risky. Everything is risky. I looked at the men. They were relaxed, confident, kings of the ashes. Stay here, I said to Sarah. When I signal, you run back to the bend in the tunnel and cover your head. Do not look back. What are you going to do? I'm going to ring the dinner bell. I crept forward. I needed to get close to the valve. I was 10 feet away when one of the men turned. He saw me. Hey, he shouted, raising his rifle. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted for the valve. He fired. The shot went wide, sparking off the concrete. I grabbed the wheel. It was stiff. Drop it, the man screamed. The others were turning now, weapons raising. I pulled the pin on my last flare from the emergency kit I'd grabbed way back in the mechanical room. I hadn't used it. I'd saved it. I cranked the valve. Gas hissed out, a loud, angry sound. Run, I screamed at Sarah. She bolted. The men hesitated. They heard the gas. They saw the flare in my hand. He's crazy, one of them yelled. I tossed the flare. It arced through the air, sputtering red light. I dove for the side tunnel. The world turned white. The blast wave hit me like a physical hammer, lifting me off my feet and throwing me down the corridor. My ears popped. The heat singed the hair on my arms. I hit the ground hard, rolling. Debris rained down. Silence. Then, coughing, I looked back. The junction was a wall of fire. The gas main was a torch, jetting flame across the chamber. The men were gone, vaporized or buried. Sarah? I rasped. I'm here. She coughed from the darkness. I stood up, swaying. My ears were ringing. We go, I said, east, before the fire spreads. We stumbled past the burning junction. The heat was intense, but the path was clear. We walked for another hour. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollowed out. My legs felt like wood. Then, the air changed. It smelled fresh, cold. Do you smell that? Sarah asked. Lake water, I said. We turned a corner. Ahead, a grate, and beyond it, gray light. We reached the grate. I pushed it open. We stepped out. We were under Wacker Drive, on the lower level near the Riverwalk. It was silent. The river was gray, sluggish. Debris floated in the current. We climbed the embankment to the street level. I looked around. Chicago was a skeleton. The buildings were blackened shells. Smoke hung low over the streets. Bodies lay everywhere, frozen in their final moments of terror. But it was quiet. The screaming had stopped. Where are they? Sarah whispered. Hunting, I said. Or sleeping. I checked my watch. 8:30 p.m. 12 hours. It had been 12 hours since the courier dropped in the lobby. 12 hours since the world ended. We walked to the edge of the river. A boat, a small tour boat, was drifting against the quay. Can you drive it? Sarah asked. It's a boat, I said. Throttle. Steering. I'll figure it out. We climbed aboard. I checked the cabin. Empty. I found the keys in the ignition. Whoever had run it had abandoned ship in a hurry. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. A low rumble. I cast off the lines. We drifted out into the river, heading toward the lock, toward the lake. I looked back at the city. The spire stood tall against the smoke-choked sky. It was dark now, a black monolith, but near the top I saw a flicker of light. Fire. It was consuming the penthouse. Price's office. We made it, Sarah said, sinking onto a bench. She looked broken, small. We survived, I corrected, making it implies there's somewhere to get to. I steered the boat toward the harbor lock. The lake opened up before us, vast and gray. I looked at the horizon. There were no lights, no ships, no planes, just the dark water and the coming night. I checked the Glock one last time. 4 rounds. I put it on the console. "Elias," Sarah said softly, "what do we do now?" I looked at her. I looked at the burning city. I looked at the black water. "We keep going," I said. "We find an island. We find a rig. We find somewhere they can't walk. And then we wait," I said. "We wait for the fire to burn itself out." I pushed the throttle forward. The boat surged into the open lake. Behind us, the city burned. Ahead of us, there was nothing but the dark. And for the first time in 12 hours, I wasn't doing the math, because on day 1, the only number that matters is 1. 1 day at a time, 1 breath at a time, 1 bullet at a time. I took a deep breath of the cold lake air. It tasted like ash. "Welcome to the new world," I whispered. And I steered us into the night. The engine of the tour boat was a steady rhythmic thrum beneath my feet, a mechanical heartbeat that felt reassuringly consistent after 12 hours of chaos. I stood at the helm, the wheel slick with moisture under my grip, staring out into the abyss of Lake Michigan. The water was black, an endless sheet of obsidian that swallowed the light of the stars. To my left, the shoreline of Chicago was a jagged scar of fire and smoke. The wind coming off the water was biting, carrying the chill of late October, but it also carried the smell of the city, a complex, suffocating bouquet of burning plastic, melting rubber, and roasted meat. Sarah sat on the bench seat near the stern, her knees pulled up to her chest, shivering violently. She was staring back at the spire. The building was a torch now. The fire that had started in the lower levels had found the vertical shafts, racing up the spine of the structure to consume the oxygen at the summit. The penthouse, Price's fortress of mahogany and arrogance, was glowing white-hot against the night sky. "It looks like a candle," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine and the wind. "A 90-story candle." "It's a chimney," I corrected, my voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "It's drawing air from the subway tunnels, feeding the flames. It'll burn for days." I checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank, enough to get us far, but not enough to get us across the lake to Michigan. Not in this chop. The waves were picking up, 3-foot rollers that slapped against the aluminum hull with a sound like wet palms hitting concrete. "Where are we going, Elias?" Sarah asked, turning her gaze from the fire to me. "You said an island. There aren't any islands near the city." "Not an island," I said, adjusting the course 2 degrees north. "A crib." "A crib. Water intake crib," I explained, relying on the schematics I had memorized years ago for a potential municipal water contract. "The Harrison Dever crib. It's about 3 miles offshore. It's a massive stone fortress sitting in the middle of the lake. It houses the intake shafts that pull water for the city. It has living quarters, a generator, supplies for a maintenance crew, and most importantly, it has walls." "Is there anyone there?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they evacuated, or maybe they're dead. But the infected can't swim 3 miles in 40-degree water. If we can get inside, we can lock the door. And if we can lock the door, we can sleep." Sleep. The word hung in the air like a promise of paradise. My body was shutting down. The adrenaline that had carried me down 90 flights of stairs and through a flooded basement was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. My legs trembled with every roll of the boat. My hands were cramping around the wheel. We motored on in silence for another 20 minutes. The city receded, the fires blurring into a single glowing line on the horizon. The isolation of the lake was absolute. It felt like we had left the planet, drifting in a void between worlds. Then, the engine faltered. It wasn't a violent stop. It was a hesitation, a stutter in the rhythm. Chug, chug, wheeze. My stomach dropped. "No," I hissed. "Don't you do this." I throttled down, trying to ease the load, But the engine coughed again, a wet, choking sound, and then died. The silence that followed was instant and terrifying. The roar of the fire was too distant to hear now. There was only the slap of the waves and the wind whistling through the cabin frame. "Elias?" Sarah's voice spiked an octave. "It's okay," I lied, moving to the stern. "Just a stall. Probably a fuel line issue." I lifted the engine cover. The smell of gasoline and hot oil wafted up. I clicked the small flashlight on my tactical vest, shining the beam into the compartment. The engine block looked fine. Belts were intact. I checked the fuel line. Clear. Then I looked at the raw water intake. The clear plastic bowl that filtered the lake water used to cool the engine. It was black, packed solid with sludge. "Cooling blockage," I muttered. "The intake is clogged." The computer shut it down to prevent overheating. "Can you fix it?" "I have to clear the intake," I said, standing up and moving to the transom. "It's underwater. I have to reach over the side." I looked over the gunnel. The beam of my light cut into the murky water. Debris. The lake was full of it. Trash, driftwood, plastic bags, and clothing. We had drifted into a debris field. The current from the Chicago River, reversed by the locks or just the sheer volume of runoff, was pushing everything out into the lake. "Hold the light," I told Sarah, handing her the flashlight. "Aim it right here. Don't drop it." She took the light, her hands shaking. "What is that stuff? Is that trash?" I rolled up my sleeve, plunging my arm into the freezing water. The cold was a shock, like 1,000 needles piercing my skin. I groped for the intake grate on the lower hull. My fingers brushed against something soft, something slimy. I recoiled, my heart hammering. "What?" Sarah asked, leaning over. "Just debris," I said, gritting my teeth. "Just garbage." I reached back down. I found the grate. It was matted with something fibrous. Hair? Cloth? I dug my fingers in, ripping the blockage free. It felt like wet wool. I pulled my hand up, gasping from the cold. In my fist was a clump of heavy fabric. Denim. And entangled in it, a severed finger, pale, wrinkled, the nail bitten down to the quick. I flung it into the water, wiping my hand on my pants. "Okay. It's clear. Try the key." Sarah scrambled to the helm and turned the key. The starter whined. Re. "Give it gas," I said. Re. Vroom! The engine caught. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Okay. We're moving." I reached for the engine cover to close it. Thump. The boat shuddered. Something had hit the hull. Hard. "Did we hit a log?" Sarah asked. Thump. Scrape. It came from the port side, then another from the starboard. I grabbed the flashlight from Sarah and swept the water around us. The lake was alive. They were bobbing in the swells, dozens of them. Bodies. Men and women in life jackets, in winter coats, in tattered office wear. They floated vertically, their heads barely breaking the surface, like buoys, the sleepers I had seen in the basement. But they weren't sleeping anymore. The vibration of the engine, the noise, the disturbance in the water, it had woken them. A hand slapped onto the gunwale right next to Sarah. Gray, bloated fingers curled over the aluminum rail. Sarah screamed, scrambling backward, tripping over the bench seat. A head rose from the water. A woman. Her hair was plastered to her skull like seaweed. Her face was swollen, the skin peeling away in white strips. At her eyes were open, white voids staring into the boat. She hissed, a sound like water boiling on a hot plate, and pulled herself up. "Get back!" I roared, lunging for the helm. I slammed the throttle forward. The boat lurched, the propeller biting into the water, but we didn't shoot forward. We dragged. I looked back. 2 more had grabbed the swim platform on the stern. Their weight was pulling the back of the boat down. The propeller was chopping at their legs, turning the water behind us into a frothy pink soup. But they didn't let go. They didn't feel pain. They just held on. The woman on the rail vaulted into the boat. She landed in a wet heap on the deck, shivering, water pouring from her clothes. She looked up at Sarah, her jaw unhinging. "Sarah, the hook!" I shouted, pointing to the boat hook clipped to the side of the cabin. Sarah froze. The woman scrambled toward her on hands and knees, slipping on the fiberglass deck. I abandoned the wheel. I drew the Glock. "Math," I whispered. 4 rounds. 3 targets visible. Distance, 6 feet. I fired. The shot was deafening in the open air. The bullet took the woman in the cheek, blowing out the back of her neck. She collapsed, sliding backward. But the boat was tilting. The weight on the stern was increasing. More hands were grabbing the rail. They were swarming us, a raft of the dead, knitting themselves together to drag us under. I ran to the stern. An infected man in a suit coat was halfway over the rail. I kicked him in the face. His nose crunched, but he didn't let go. He snapped at my boot. I couldn't shoot them all. If I used the ammo, I'd be empty for the crib. "The hook!" I yelled again, grabbing at myself since Sarah was paralyzed. It was a 6-foot aluminum pole with a hard plastic hook on the end. I swung it like a spear, driving the blunt end into the chest of the suit coat man. He wheezed, losing his grip, and fell back into the churn. "Sarah, drive!" I screamed. "Get us moving!" She snapped out of it. She grabbed the wheel. "Where? Where do I go?" "North. Just go." She gunned it. The boat surged. The sudden acceleration dislodged 2 more from the swim platform. But one remained. A massive shape, maybe a dock worker, clinging to the ladder. He was climbing up, water streaming off his broad shoulders. I stepped onto the rear bench. I raised the boat hook high and brought it down like an executioner's axe. The heavy plastic head struck the man's skull. Crack! He didn't fall. He looked at me, his face a ruin of waterlogged flesh, and reached for my ankle. I slipped. The deck was slick with lake water and black slime. I fell backward, landing hard on my hip. The hook skittered away. The man grabbed my boot. His grip was iron. He pulled. I slid toward the edge. I clawed at the deck, but there was nothing to hold. I was going in. "Elias!" Sarah screamed. She left the wheel. She didn't run to me. She ran to the console. She grabbed the flare gun kit I had ignored earlier. She fumbled with the latch. The plastic case popped open. An orange Orion flare pistol. She raised it. She didn't aim at the sky. She aimed at the man's face. Pop. The flare struck the man in the open mouth. It didn't explode. It ignited. Magnesium and oxidizers burning at 3,000 degrees. His head became a lantern. Smoke poured out of his throat. He released my leg, thrashing wildly, clawing at the fire consuming his face. He fell backward into the water, a glowing ember sinking into the black deep. I scrambled up, gasping, "Drive! Don't stop!" Sarah jumped back to the wheel. The boat leveled out, picking up speed, leaving the field of bobbing heads behind in our wake. I collapsed on the bench, my chest heaving. I looked at the flare gun on the deck. 1 shot. She'd made it count. "You okay?" I rasped. Sarah was gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She didn't look at me. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "I see it," she whispered. "I see the crib." I pulled myself up and looked. It was there, blooming out of the darkness like a medieval castle planted in the sea. The Harrison Dever crib. Massive stone walls, a slate roof, a lighthouse tower. It sat on a concrete caisson that rose 20 feet out of the water. It was dark. No navigation lights, no windows lit. "Slow down," I said. "Approach from the south side. There should be a ladder and a service door." We idled closer. The waves crashed against the base of the crib, sending spray high into the air. It looked formidable, impenetrable. "I don't see a dock," Sarah said. "There isn't one. It's designed for heavy weather. We have to jump for the ladder. I maneuvered the boat alongside the concrete base. The steel ladder rungs were rusted, but looked solid. I go first, I said. I secure the landing, then you throw the bag, then you climb. I timed the swell. The boat rose on a wave. I leaped. I grabbed the ladder. The cold steel bit into my palms. It smelled of unwashed bodies, human waste, and stale food. The smell of a bunker. Hello, I called out. We're survivors. We're not infected. Silence. I stepped inside. Light raised. We were in a mudroom. Boots lined the wall, coats. We moved deeper, a central hallway. To the left, a kitchen area. To the right, bunk rooms. In the kitchen, a lantern sat on a table. It was off, but the glass was warm. They're here, I whispered. Don't move, a voice said from the shadows. It was a woman's voice, hard, brittle. I turned the light toward the voice. She was sitting in a chair at the end of the hall. She had a shotgun across her lap. Beside her sat a man, his head bandaged, looking pale and sick. Put the gun down, she said. I lowered the Glock slowly. My name is Elias. This is Sarah. We came from the Spire. We just want shelter. The woman looked at us. She looked at the blood on my clothes. She looked at Sarah's bare, bleeding feet. Did you bring food? She asked. We have water, I said. Some rations, a first aid kit. At the mention of the first aid kit, the man on the chair looked up. Antibiotics? He croaked. Yes, I said. Broad spectrum. The woman lowered the shotgun an inch. He was cut. Rusty metal. It's infected. Not that infection. Just regular infected. Bad fever. I can help, I said. I was a combat engineer. I know trauma. She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. Come in. Lock the door behind you. I went back to the steel door. I threw the heavy interior bolts, sealing us inside the stone fortress. I walked back to the kitchen. Sarah was already sitting at the table, her head in her hands. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. I opened my bag. I took out the trauma kit. I walked over to the man. Let's see it, I said. He peeled back the bandage on his leg. It was an ugly gash, red and swollen, oozing yellow pus. Sepsis was setting in. I can clean this, I said. I have iodine. I have ciprofloxacin. It'll hurt. Do it, the man said through gritted teeth. I worked. It was mechanical. Clean. Disinfect. Stitch. Bandage. The routine was a balm for my own mind. It was a problem I could solve. It was math that worked. When I was done, the woman handed me a bottle of water. I'm Karen. That's David. We were the maintenance crew. The boat left without us when the calls started coming in. They panicked. The city is gone. We saw, she said, looking toward the dark window. We watched the lights go out one by one. I sat down next to Sarah. I put my arm around her. She leaned into me, shaking. We're safe? She asked. For tonight, I said. We have walls. We have water. We have antibiotics. I looked at the Glock on the table. 3 rounds left. Get some sleep, I told her. I'll take the first watch. She nodded, closing her eyes. She was asleep in seconds. I sat there in the dim light of the lantern, listening to the wind howl outside. I thought about Miller, about Price, about the courier in the lobby. I thought about the prep, the memes, the laughter. They laughed at my prep. I looked at the bandage on David's leg. I looked at the heavy door. I looked at the sunrise beginning to bleed gray light through the dirty window. The prep hadn't saved the world. It hadn't saved my friends. It hadn't stopped the collapse. But it had bought us this. One night, one sunrise, I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was cresting the horizon. painting the lake in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. To the west, the city was a silhouette of jagged ruins against the morning sky. The smoke was still rising, a funeral shroud over the millions who hadn't made it. The world was dead. The systems were gone. The rules were rewritten. But as I watched the light hit the water, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I was alive. Sarah was alive. The math of survival had changed. It wasn't about stock options or quarterly reports anymore. It wasn't about social standing or career paths. It was about calories. It was about ammunition. It was about trust. I touched the cold glass. "We start over," I whispered to the rising sun. "We rebuild, or we die trying." I turned back to the room, to the survivors, to the future. This was day 2, and I was ready.